Welcome back to a brand new episode of the All Immigrant Podcast. I am your host, Abin. I am once again joined by my co-host, Vivek. And we have a brand new guest today. Vivek, could you do the honors, please?
Yep. I want to start by saying, Abin, I'm glad you didn't call me Rohit again. So low-hanging fruit there, but either way. So yeah, we have, we're gaining some momentum. We're extremely excited about where things are going. We have an amazing new guest today, and I'm very honored to introduce her to you. So I would like to introduce Dr. Malani. So I've known Sonia Malani for a few months now. So I met her and her mother at a common friend's birthday party, I think somewhere last year. Her mother and I actually hit it off instantly because we share the same alma mater from Mumbai, which we discovered later on, which was amazing. And over the course of the years, Sonia has become extremely good friends with Vish, my wife. And this episode came to be because Vish talks about how accomplished Sonia is constantly and how she's done all these amazing things and she's doing all these amazing things. And that got me to saying, Sonia has an amazing story. I would love to chat with her about through this podcast, and that's what led to the events of me reaching out to Sonia for this. So thank you, Sonia, for accepting. She's of course a very accomplished woman. She has a doctorate in naturopathic medicine. She's completed her residency in clinical focus in integrative oncology and palliative medicine. She's going to explain what that means to all of us very shortly. She's also a contributing author to Anne Berger's 5th edition of Principles and Practice of Palliative Oncology. She's a co-investigator at the AIMS Cancer Outcome Study, a prospective outcome study measuring overall survival in cancer patients utilizing integrative oncology. She currently sees patients, she teaches, she writes, she acts as a research consultant for integrative and functional medicine across organizations nationwide in the US. She's also a certified yoga instructor, meditation teacher, psychotherapy provider, and when she's not working, she perfects her barista skills, rummaging through local libraries and spending time with her family. Okay, that's the introduction. Welcome to our podcast.
Now, hearing my introduction back explains why I'm so tired all the time. So thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay, I think, yeah. So, yeah, I guess there's only one place to start, Sonia. So Vivek did mention to me that your parents moved to the United States several decades ago, and I'm sure that when they left, they had a certain image of what the country was like. How much of that image influenced your upbringing?
Yeah, so my parents came over to the US in the 70s. My dad was a medical doctor, an MD, and came over to the US to finish up his residency, finish up his training, and start practicing in the US. My parents, like many, had an arranged marriage. And so once, it was one of those situations where mom and dad met, 2 weeks later, they're getting married, 1,200 people at their wedding in Bombay. And so, yeah, one of those types of situations. But once my parents got married, my mom came over, and I'm the third and youngest of the family. So I have 2 older sisters. There's a pretty big age gap amongst my sisters and I. So I'm 10 years younger than my oldest sister. And the reason that I say that is because I feel like being the youngest in a family, in a first generation family, is kind of a little bit of a different feeling than what the firstborn has, right? So the eldest, my older sister, was my parents' first experience of having a child in the US. Again, my parents being born and raised in Bombay didn't know all of the little nuances of American culture. Having after school peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, Sesame Street was totally foreign to them. Things like, what to pack at a school lunch, or, how to talk to your kids about college and how to prepare for an internship. All of those were really new. And my parents had to go through that for the first time with my sister, my oldest sister, Priya. But what is interesting, I feel like, about my upbringing is that my parents in some ways allowed my sisters to do a lot of my kind of coaching and counseling as I grew up. So, when it came to deciding what to do for schools or what to do for careers, because my parents knew that my sisters had more experience being in the US, they would often say, hey, why don't you ask your sisters about college essays or interviews or how to, get an internship? And so it's interesting because my oldest sister sometimes will comment that she kind of had the brunt of, all the growing pains of what it's like to come over to a new country and try to speak the same language, for your kids when you haven't really been born and raised here. I think I kind of had it easy, to be honest. I do feel like my parents did an amazing job maintaining and keeping the values and the culture of what they grew up with, while also allowing me to completely explore and completely accept the environment in which I was being raised in.
Awesome. Wow. So it's interesting because I'm also a younger sibling. So I think I can empathize in the sense that, my brother is almost 5 years older than me. So he also over time has become like a parent, like a third parent. Even today, when I talk to him, I call my mom and dad and I call my brother, and, it's kind of like this triangle of this parenting triangle that we have going on here. So I completely get it. It's similar. I think every younger sibling with an older sibling who is a little older by more than a couple of years, I think would totally understand that.
As an older sibling, I can attest to the fact that yes, the younger sibling does have it a lot easier. I think nothing ever prepares you for parenthood, right? So you can read all the books you want. You can watch whatever now you can watch whatever videos, take whatever courses. When it hits you like a ton of bricks, and you have no idea what to expect because each experience is so unique. So definitely my parents had a very unique scenario with me as well. And then when my sister came along, she just looked at whatever was going right and wrong with me and just decided to go ahead with what was right. And so my parents would definitely say they had a tougher time raising me, not because I was a horrible child or anything. It was just because it was such a new experience for them. Like Sonia mentioned, that it's as the youngest in a family, it definitely seems a lot easier.
Yeah, it's kind of a double whammy, right? For the eldest, not only is it the parents' first rodeo with raising a child, but then for, parents who have just relocated and immigrated to an entirely different country, it's like, okay, wait, I'm doing parenthood and also a lot of other things for the very first time. And I can't even imagine, these questions are so insightful because I'd love to go back and kind of ask even my mom and, see what her experience was like with my oldest sister. I do know that my eldest sister has just really she's always kind of been a second parent to me. And so and even my other sister is 7 years older, Nisha, but they've both played a really major role in the way that I've grown up because they were the ones that were more savvy in some ways.
That makes sense. I know, absolutely. So, you mentioned, immigration, you mentioned your parents. So I guess, in the US, did you grow up? And obviously, you had visible differences. You mentioned some of the references that, that your parents may not know, and something that you were also learning. So maybe talk us through where you grew up and some of the differences you found with other kids in the US, and how did you reconcile those differences?
Yeah, so I also had kind of a unique experience here. So I was born in New York in Westchester County, but at the age of around 3 or 4, my family relocated to a small town in Kentucky. And the intention and the reason for the relocation was my dad was a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And at the time, there was a children's hospital here in Kentucky that really needed some support, really needed psychiatrists. And so they recruited my dad from New York. What I was told is when we moved down here, my dad was like, all right, we'll do a couple years. I'll help get this hospital up and running, and then we'll move back to New York. Well, we never moved back to New York. So I spent pretty much age 4 through 18 in Kentucky, and then actually ended up moving back to New York for college. But Kentucky, being a minority in a small town in America, regardless of what state you're in, has its difficulties. But then being in a small town, primarily white in the South, is kind of a whole different ballgame, right? So there was definitely visible differences. There was, something that I would get comments a lot on is just the accents of my parents. Both my parents were born and raised in in obviously Bombay, but they were brought up in English speaking schools. English was their first language, but obviously there's going to be an accent, right? My mom is fluent in French. She's, speaks German. She can speak so many different dialects of Hindi. And same with my dad. He was fluent in many different languages. But even though they had perfect English, there still was a little bit of an accent to it, right? And in Kentucky, when everyone sounds the same, that really stands out. So that was, as soon as you open up your mouth, people realize, oh, we're different. And then just a lot of the cultures and the values. I think in India particularly, there's a lot of respect for elders and parents. And, that's something that I was really raised with, that I remember was like also kind of a big difference amongst me and my friends. I would go over and always say like, hi, Mrs. John or Jane, always address them very formally. And my friends would come over and call my parents by their first name, which was like, that was just foreign to me. So there was definitely a lot of cultural differences. Again, I mentioned earlier, my parents did an amazing job of just trying to help us assimilate as best as we could. So, if there was, if my friends wanted to take me to church or take me to synagogue or take me to, their family get together, my parents would encourage me to go. We're very, very much like, go explore, experience, and teach us what you learn, right? Like it was a very collaborative and forward-thinking environment that I grew up in. But yeah, our food tastes different. Our food smells different. Our house, quote, smelled like curry a lot. And I think the way that I handled it, honestly, was I developed my own sense of humor. I think anyone that went to high school or middle school will know that like I was the first to make the joke before they were able to. I would say the curry joke, or I would make, whatever it was. And I think that was a little bit of like a protective mechanism so that I could just protect on myself from what was about to be said. And I think as I've grown up and as I've gotten older, I've really started to embrace the things that make me different. Because that's, in my medical practice and practicing medicine, that's what allows me to, really be there and help people the way that I do. So, I think it's hard for a lot of kids who are the minority growing up. And you have to develop a lot of resilience at a really young age.
Yeah. It's funny that when we're growing up, we're kind of taught in school to fit in. And, when we get into college and we get into the professional world or whatever we're doing, we're always like, oh, we got to find a way to be different. It's kind of like everything we're taught throughout our life. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, no, you got to go do the exact opposite now. So I totally
it's
get
like
it.
you're punished for stepping out of bounds growing up because you're supposed to confine to the norms so specifically. But then when you're applying to universities, like much like what Vivek said, they ask you what makes you special, and you're looking at the form going, well, there was something special about me, but we've given the learnings and the teachings around me, I don't know anymore, which is why so many people are at that crossroads at that point in time. So coming off the back of that question, Sonia, I just wanted to know, given like you having to try to fit in high school and just generally amongst your peers, and I think a lot of second-gen immigrants are labeled with the tag, with the ABCD tag, specifically by other Indians. And I just wanted to know that growing up, and even now to a certain degree, do you associate yourself more with the Indian side of you? Do you associate yourself more with the American side of you? Is it a bit of is it a scenario where it's like the best of both worlds? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I think two things. I think it's a little bit of the best of both worlds. And I think it also is contextually, right? I think there's certain situations, certain environments where I'm allowed to sort of show a little bit more of that Indian side of me, where I know it will be understood and received. And when I don't feel like it will be understood or received, I do tend to pack it down a little bit. And I think, again, that's, kind of a tactic or safety mechanism that you probably develop as a child in order to help navigate some of these different situations. I think the first time you hear some of the comments about how you are different, it can really sting and it can really burn and kind of leave you feeling like you were less than. And I think it's so. I do feel like sometimes when I'm in those situations, even till today, I will say, okay, like, is it safe? Is it safe for me to show this side of myself? Right? Because when I feel, from like a nervous system perspective, because I'm always thinking about health, when you have that safety, that's when you can be your most authentic self and show your most authentic self, right? When your body doesn't feel safe and your body thinks it's running away from a bear, it's going to shut down and you're not going to operate. Your prefrontal cortex is not going to be thinking. So I definitely would say that I'm good at sort of assessing the situation. I remember really vividly a moment that when I left Kentucky and finally ended up back in New York, I went to college in the city at NYU. And I remember in the library of the college campus, I walked into the library and I walked into the back where there was these elevators. And I remember getting onto the elevator, kind of my first weekend at the school. And within the elevator, there was like 6 different languages being spoken. They're all different languages. Hindi was being spoken, Mandarin was being spoken, English was being spoken. And I remember taking a huge sigh of relief of like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that's different anymore. And I think college for me was really the time that I started to come into myself. And, I had a much bigger and diverse friend group just simply because I was living in a bigger city. And so not only was I able to develop really strong friendships with people who were similar, like the ABCDs, or, people whose parents were from India, but also from all over the world. And I think at the end of the day, when you talk to people who have immigrated here, we all have a similar experience from the standpoint of there still is, in America at least, us versus them. And it's something that every, immigrant or person who is different has to learn how to toe.
Yeah, I was told this. So when I moved to New York as well, and I was reaching out to there's one of my mentors was at the time living out on the West Coast, and he mentioned that this is something you'd have to keep an eye out for, because I walked in and without a clue, I'm like, oh, opportunity, I'm going to figure this out, and very quickly realized that there are certain ways to do things. And he mentioned that there is very clearly an us versus them mentality, and it may not be out there, but it definitely exists. There's a strong undercurrent of it. So I totally get what you mean.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I mean, it's also very individualistic, right? So it's us versus them probably exists. It's also individual, right? Everyone is, it's less community centric. Specifically talking about the US now, but it's less community centric, more individualistic. That's kind of how society is woven here, right? And I think that would be a big difference from somebody, from somebody who's grown up in India, who have had parents, being exposed to Indian culture. So that's definitely a different, a stark difference point, I would say.
Yeah. It's interesting because I was just talking to a friend about who recently had kids and is trying to build this like village, right? There's this whole concept and, for people who are new parents in the US right now, it's like, okay, we got to build our tribe. We got to build our village to help raise our children. And in India, that's just a given, right? Yeah. And even amongst the Indians who are in the US, there still is more of that tribal or village mentality. It's like, okay, I see that you maybe need some food. Let me drop some off, or come over for some chai. Or it's very much kind of this collaborative collectivism. But what's frustrating is I do think that COVID, at least in the US, really changed that, even for immigrants, even for people who were born in India or whatever country you're coming from. Like a country that has a little bit more collectivism, I think was shaken up a little bit by COVID, because it was a time where we literally were not safe from one another. Like we had to stay away in order to keep ourselves safe. And I've been wondering and hoping and kind of just really looking for that sense of community post-COVID amongst Indians, amongst Americans, whoever it is, right? But I do think that has changed. Have you guys noticed that that's been some of your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in college. I was in my last semester of grad school when COVID hit, and I was going up to Westchester County every day for an internship. And I think within 2 weeks, because I was in the MBA program, and it required you to be so social, and definitely. And there was a whole issue with me getting to the program because I was late. There was a whole scenario around it, but I'd say around December and January, I finally started to get close to a lot of people, and then COVID hit, and then suddenly, there was this not, and because we were all like you mentioned, we all had to be wary of each other because no one knew who was carrying what. There was almost like this invisible wall that was put between your groups of friends. And I think it's coming back now. Like those walls are slowly coming down now, because through 2020, it was obviously, unless people you lived with, like unless you saw on a daily basis, and you had no choice because living in New York, the chances of you having roommates are obviously infinitely higher. Unless it was those people, you weren't really seeing anybody else. And I think the longer it went, the more comfortable we got in our isolation. I would almost like to say I was a far more social being pre-COVID than I am now, which is both a good and a bad thing, really, because I do enjoy my my alone time a lot more than I used to before, because I really struggled with it in the earlier parts of COVID, right? But I definitely feel that things. I mean, we're slowly getting back together. We're opening up to each other a lot more than we have in the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The other aspect of COVID that has been kind of has changed, I think, a little bit of America's individualism is just because of like inflation and how expensive everything has gotten. A lot of kids are moving back home with their parents and starting to like live back in those communities, just simply because it's financially responsible and it can be sometimes financially beneficial. And I've seen, because in America, it's like, okay, once you're 18, you're out of the house. You're out of the house. Go somewhere else for college. You don't stay close for college. You leave. Even if you live in a great city, you leave that city and go somewhere else. And now I'm noticing that the talk amongst, I guess, Gen Z is more about like, okay, let me start, maybe I need to take care of my parents. Maybe I'll stay close to home so that I can help support my family or help support my parents. And it's a little, I did think COVID impacted the younger generation in a way that I wasn't expecting. And I think we've seen a whole lot of millennials move back home, which has been interesting as well. But yeah, that's something that I, even though we are maybe less social, I think there has been some intrinsic community values that have come out of this pandemic.
Absolutely. I think COVID really brought me closer to my parents, because one, I saw what it did to a lot of people. So I was in Westchester County for the first wave. I was in New York for the first wave, where things were really bad, and I was in India for the Delta wave, where things were horrendous. And it was like we just announced the vaccines, but no one was really taking them. And within, I think, the summer of 2021, things went absolutely kaput, right? And that whole experience really brought me closer to my folks. And I think it also has to do with, I turned 30 that year. And the older you get, you start to realize that, I'm getting old, but my parents are getting older. And then you suddenly have to contend with the idea of mortality. And that's a very scary concept. So it's just, I definitely would say that, like piggybacking off your point, that the idea of community, especially amongst your close peers, really fostered in like, for me personally anyway, in these last years.
Yeah.
So I started my MBA last year. So that was, just after the whole, I mean, not after, but kind of, I think the worst year of the pandemic was 2020, and it kind of got a little better in 2021. So I started my MBA in 2021, and I think, I kind of have had a really good experience in terms of, I've had a very mixed experience. I've had, a lot of mixing of, I mean, no one really seems to care. It's almost as if COVID is not a thing, which is scary at some level, but also I didn't find I found the kind of friends I make very cross-cultural. I didn't find, I don't find it to be like very cliquish, so I think that part of it has been very positive for me, but it also could be a function of the fact that, it's business school and everyone's here to make friends with everyone. That's kind of the point of being there. So you don't want to, it's not college. So I probably discount my experience a bit, because I think going to college might be a little different experience today than it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we spoke so much about culture, and the importance of culture, and how there is a cultural difference here. So I think the next question, we want to just jump into culture for a second. So obviously, you have this unique cultural experience and cultural identity from many people around you. So how how do you value that, and how important is that to you, and is it tied to your self-worth? in any way? Maybe walk us through that.
Yeah. So I feel like for most people that may be struggling with these kind of existential questions of who am I? What am I doing? What's my purpose? Like, what's the bigger picture? I wonder about their connection to culture and values. And the reason I say that is because I've been one of those people for majority of my life. I've been asking those big questions. Who am I? What is my purpose? Like, ask any of my friends. They will tell you that I'm like chronically in an existential crisis. But I have found that as I've gotten older and as I have tried to keep that Indian culture and Indian side less suppressed, I have felt more connected to my purpose. And I think that culture and values are the foundation for why we exist and how we move in this world, right? So I think there are two different things, right? There's the cultural aspects, which are, maybe a little bit more of your traditions and your rituals and your the meaning that you assign to things. That feels a little bit more of the cultural pieces. And then there's the values, which are just kind of your principles of like, for example, I mentioned earlier, like in the Indian culture, we value elders. That is I don't think anyone would argue with me there. And so I think the value and culture that I was exposed to as a child is not one that I was necessarily like so willing to accept because I wanted to fit in. And my values and cultures were different than the values and cultures that I grew up in, right? The environment that I grew up in Kentucky and all of that. And I think as I've gotten older, that has been something that I've leaned on a lot more to get through, just the ups and downs of life, because it feels like to me that my values are almost like directions on a map or even like a destination on the map. As long as I know where I am going and where that destination is, then I can figure out routes. I can take an alternative route. I can take a back road. But without that destination on the map, I literally have no idea where the hell I'm going. So that's something that I really, I've spent a lot of years studying yoga, not from the physical practice, but more from the philosophical practice. And I just love the way that yoga, true yoga in its essence, the way that it was originally taught, not the way it's done as a fitness routine here or in many countries now, but the philosophy and essence of yoga really for me has been like studying that has been how I've really solidified my values. And I think that it's also like, whether it's the way that India looks at health through like the lens of Ayurveda, or whether the way it looks through, physical health and things like yoga, or, even just knowledge like through Vedanta, there are so many interwoven ways to interact with the philosophy and the values and the culture of India. And it's almost like I find that no matter what you're interested in, whether it's health or medicine or engineering, you can find a way to connect with the values of our culture. Does that make sense?
It does, actually. I know it makes perfect sense. And I also think that when we're growing up, we don't necessarily understand the values of the culture that we're trying to, we're looking at. And I feel like we kind of embrace it in our mid-20s, because then we realize that, hey, you know what, this is a big part of who I am, and I'm not going to try to push it away anymore, but I'm going to embrace it, and I'm going to take the best aspects of it into my life and try to see if I can enrich my life through that. And I think, and I think what you're saying is similar. And I believe that, we've all gone through that journey where we push something away and then we realize, you know what, hey, this is us. This is part of who we are, So, absolutely. Great point.
And I work with cancer patients mostly, and a lot of them have terminal diagnoses, and a lot of them are going through these existential crises as well of what, if I'm going to die, how do I want to live now? Or what does death mean? And how, just they really start to look inward. And I noticed a lot of them will go back to the religion that they were raised with, whether it's Christianity or Catholicism. And, that's something that I've always really wondered about as I've kind of witnessed a lot of cancer patients go through that. And I think what's amazing about Hinduism is it's so much philosophy. It's not necessarily like do these things and, this is exactly how to live. It's more of just like, let me offer some guidance and some knowledge on how you could live. And that's what, I always kind of really go back to, just having like faith and trust and looking at what those kind of North Stars are.
It's
Yeah,
more
I mean,
spirituality than religion. Yeah,
It's
essentially.
I mean,
yeah.
I think a lot of people would say that Hinduism is not a religion, right? It's
Yeah.
more of a
Yeah.
philosophy. It's a way of life. So I think that's what's pretty amazing is like so inherent to India is a philosophy for life. It's not necessarily religion, but like we have a really, really deep philosophy. And whether you've been raised, reading the Bhagavad Gita or not, you probably likely absorb some of that philosophy by being exposed just to the culture.
I don't even think you need to be immersed in religion to pull from Indian culture, or like to or to take lessons from it, right? Because it's ideally what culture to me is ideally been what I've seen around me growing up. Culture comes through family, because those are the lessons that you learn from family. Because these are you take what they teach you, their values, their how to treat people, and that to me plays a big part more than anything else. I'm not the most religious person, and over the years, given how the political climate in the country has been, I've I've moved further away from religion and more towards spirituality, where I embrace the idea of doing good to other people that ultimately kickstarts a whole karmic cycle, and that's been my thought process. So I totally get when you speak about how it's like Hinduism is more of a philosophy than it is a religion,
Yeah.
and that just makes a lot more sense.
Well, and even the way that you just said, like, the way that you go about and provide service to others is for your own karmic cycle. Like,
Yeah.
karma is something that's inherent to the way that we were raised of like,
Yeah.
kind of what goes around comes around, and think about your actions. And, I think that is, if you're surrounded by that and immersed in that kind of, concepts, you're going to absorb it and you're going to realize like, oh, okay, I need to serve in a way that if it comes back to me, it's a way that I want to receive it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I mean, yeah, this is a great jump off point for my next question, because you did mention getting into oncology. Now, what made you decide to pursue a career in medicine, and why oncology? Because oncology is a very taxing um, super specialization, given the amount of personal investment it needs. So, what was the story behind that?
Yeah. Yes. So I know that there is a lot of pressure within the Indian community to be a doctor. I was given yeah. So I'm really, really fortunate that I was actually never given an ounce of that pressure. My dad was an MD. I grew up, I was raised in a household where there was, my dad was a doctor. There was a lot of doctors in my extended family. But interestingly enough, my dad actually never really wanted to be a doctor. He really wanted to be in Bollywood. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Growing up, he used to model. He modeled for Finlays and did, some like toothpaste ads and things like that. He really wanted to be a model and an actor. He was a really talented surgeon. And so he went to med school, was doing his surgical residency in India. And there was a few people that were like, we are going to call producers and tell them not to allow you to audition. Like, we are going to call casting and not allow you to audition, because we want you to be in medicine. You're really talented. So he stayed in medicine, but it definitely wasn't his passion or his like calling. He wanted to be in a more creative field. So I was never, I think because of his experience, I was never raised with being pressured towards medicine ever. But what happened is that cancer just kept coming up in my life. So my mom was, So my mom was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer when I was 6 years old. She was sick. She went through chemotherapy, surgery, multiple surgeries, a lot of complications from surgeries. And for probably like age 6 through 10, I was in and out of hospitals just with her as, after school, I would go sit at chemo with her, or I would drive up to a specialty hospital for her to get a consult for a surgery. So that was a huge part of my childhood. And then when I was 19 years old, I was a sophomore in college. My father was diagnosed with stage 4 gastric cancer. So stage 4 stomach cancer. It was really advanced. It had spread all over his abdomen. His prognosis was 3 months. And at that point, I was 19. I was kind of, in that, what do I want to major in? What do I want to do? And I learned about naturopathic medicine through one of his doctors. I learned about this school out on the West Coast called Bastyr University. And I learned about this specialty of medicine that has a really deep philosophy to it. It is about prevention. It is about seeing the body as a whole. It's about seeing the body as a system. It's about educating and teaching others about medicine and teaching them about how to interact with their body, similar to osteopathic medicine, osteopathic philosophy. And I think within the span of 24 hours, I had this like inner feeling that it was like, this is what I have to do. I have to go be a naturopathic doctor and I have to go specialize in cancer. And I have to learn everything there possibly is about cancer. And of course, now that I'm in the field and I'm practicing and I've had some time to process my feelings when I was 19 years old, I think a lot of my drive was just to never feel helpless again. At that point, I'd had two advanced stage cancer diagnoses in my family. Both of my parents, both primary caregivers, had been diagnosed. And as a 19-year-old, I never wanted to go through the feeling of feeling helpless when a family member was sick. And so that has been kind of my driving force through medical school, through residency, through all of my training, was to really kind of figure out cancer, why it happens, what we can do. Is there anything else that we can additionally do? So now I specialize in this field called Integrative oncology, where it uses integrative medicine, things like botanical medicine, exercise, nutrition, lifestyle modifications, IV therapy, and some other advanced modalities alongside chemotherapy, surgery, and radiation. And my goal as an integrative oncologist is to really enhance the quality of life of my patients and also hopefully improve their overall survival so that they live longer than if they were to just do chemo or surgery or radiation. I think medical oncologists and the field of oncology has come so far, but a huge gap in the system is cancer patients are miserable. Like their quality of life is so poor. And there's a lot that we can really do from a symptom management perspective to really help them feel better through their journey and reduce the amount of hospitalizations that they have during their chemotherapy, improve their recovery from surgery. So there's a big need that can still be met for these patients. And that's kind of my goal and the impetus behind all of my research work that I do as well.
Awesome. When I first introduced you today on this podcast, as I was walking through, everything you've done, I was thinking, wow, you've done a lot of amazing different things, right? But hearing your answer now, it kind of made me realize that, hey, you know what? There are all these different things, but it's all so weaved together. There's an underlying thing connected, right? So you're talking about holistic health, wellness. I think that's the theme, right? So you talk about yoga, which is the physical and the mental part. You talk about nutrition. You talk about therapy. You talk about on oncology. I feel like everything that you're doing is kind of connected in a very holistic level, and it's all about the physical, mental, spiritual perspective on health. And when I see it that way, everything you've done makes so much sense. I'm like, of course you would do this, of course you would do that. It just seems so connected to each other, which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on that. I do feel, hindsight is 2020, but I have felt for this past decade has felt so led. Like I just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and the path is kind of keeps getting created in front of me. So I am really grateful. My dad's prognosis was 3 months, but he ended up making it 15. He did a lot of integrative medicine alongside, his diagnosis, and he knew that this was my journey, and he passed away right before I started medical school. But I don't know, in some ways it kind of feels like this was his last gift of like helping me figure out what I was meant to do in this lifetime, and I really now, like, I can't even imagine myself doing anything else. I was originally studying to be a graphic designer, and I was working in a magazine in New York City. I was making, I was really thought the rest of my life was going to be spent in graphics. And while I still love like the creative side and I still love making graphics, and I, like now in the age of Instagram, like I love spending 15 minutes on a post or things like that. From a graphic perspective, I just cannot imagine myself doing anything else, truly.
It's amazing.
The artwork on this episode needs to be zero bullshit, like now that I know. So
that's really amazing.
You really bring our A game for this one, Vivek.
So Sonia, you spoke about your parents for some time. You spoke about that whole generational thing. We've also spoken about culture. So I mean, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But the question is, if you were to have kids, would you bring them up as Indian American, or what kind of blend would you bring into this whole thing?
Yeah, I've thought about this question like a lot. And I have two amazing nieces. I have a 3-year-old niece and a 1-year-old niece, who I've gotten to sort of watch their upbringing, and I've gotten to watch and be really observant on, raising children in this country without a whole lot of support, without a whole lot of help. If I have children in this lifetime, which I hope I do, I really want them to experience this kind of, mixed American Indian experience that I had, like the way that I was fully taught to embrace the American side. And also, I mean, I may have suppressed it a little bit, but I was really taught to fully embrace my Indian side as well. And I think, now there are areas where I am much more American than I am Indian. And there are definitely areas where I'm much more Indian than I am American. But I really hope that my children can see my connection to India, and absorb a little bit of that through my experience. Something that has been really kind of a priority for me is making sure I, just visit my family in India as often as I can. Pre-COVID, I was there every year. I just got to spend 2 months in Bombay and spend a little time in Rishikesh earlier this year in April and May. And I go back as often as I can. I spend long periods if I can, and I fully try to immerse myself, because I always leave with my heart just like so full. It almost feels like in some ways like India is my recharge station. I kind of, I like come here, I like, use all my reserves. I use all the love that I've been given while I'm in India. I share it and give as much as I can. I give it to my patients and, anyone that I kind of come and encounter with. And then once I'm running on empty, I'm like, I think I need to book a trip. So, I definitely feel personally really connected. I will say also that connection for me happened when I was 18. I grew up like kicking and screaming when it came to going to India. We used to go to India every year growing up. And, I would be like, Mom, I don't want to go. There's mosquitoes and I get bug bites and there's no AC and it's hot and I don't want to go. I want to hang out with my friends. And this summer, like I want to go to this camp. And I was for the most part, didn't appreciate it as a kid. And on my own, totally, like it kind of felt like I just like woke up one day when I was 18. I think it was maybe right before I started college, or maybe within the first few months of starting college, I called up my parents and I said, hey, can we book a trip? I really want to go back. And I think when I started initiating trips is when it totally changed for me, right? Like that's when I wanted to engage. That's when I wanted to really kind of interact and be aware. And I wasn't, I wanted to go sit at the like 30th auntie's house for, in one day. And I was willing and I wanted to soak as much as I could in. So the truth of the matter is kids kind of come through you, right? They're not for you. So as much as I can, I want them to have their own experience. I hope that they see how much I love India and how much my family there has impacted me, how much my parents' upbringing has impacted me. Whether I can impose it on them, I don't know if that's possible. But I think that I hope that children can see the things that make a person light up. And I think that they will know that this is something that makes me light up. And, another huge variable is like who I will raise children with and how their relationship is. But I hope for me, at least, my kids can see just how closely I hold the country to my heart, honestly. Yeah.
I really like the fact when you said that, you cannot, they come through you, they're not for you, which I think is, that's really like hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it is. We have all these great plans of how you want to bring our kids up, but ultimately, it depends on so many things which are beyond our control. So
yeah. And I have to give credit to my parents for that, because I do feel like, again, they exposed us, but they did not impose anything on us. And I think that's why I was able to have that relationship with, oh man, I think I want to go explore India for myself and I want to see what this is about. And when you can have that kind of healthy, unconditional detachment, I think, that's when your kids are more receptive, but I'm not a parent yet. So we'll find out what actually happens. We can do a podcast in like another decade and see what the results are.
So Abhin, do you want to do one last question? I'm just looking at the clock.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do one. I'll try and just couple a bunch of things together. Because I think we have a fair few, but okay.
Yeah.
To our listeners, what is naturopathic wellness when it comes to oncology? Because I have the experience of cancer in my family as well. My mother was a patient. My grandmother was a patient. My other grandmother was also a patient. So there's been a history there as well. But I am aware, and I also come from a family of doctors, engineers, and I've grown up around cardiac surgeons and orthopedics. You name them, basically. So, but I am yet to come across something that deals with naturopathic wellness, specifically in the oncology department, as well as integrative oncology. So if you could shed some light on that, that would be great. And further add to that question, someone practicing a niche field in medicine as an Indian doctor, what are the challenges that you've had to face? I'm sorry if that's a lot, but I'm just trying to
He just combined 3 questions, which is awesome.
Let's do it.
Make it happen.
Okay, so naturopathic. So anyone who is in India listening, they will hear the word naturopathy and say, "Oh, we there, that's on every corner, right?" There is naturopathy, homeopathy, all of these different kind of subspecialties of medicine and traditional medicine. But naturopathic medicine in the US is actually a 4-year accredited medical school where the first 2 years are the same as your MD and DO years. Basic sciences, you're doing anatomy, physiology, all of that. But then your final 2 years in school, you are not only learning pharmacology and all the different pharmaceuticals, but you also learn botanical medicine. And then we have hours upon hours of nutrition training, which right now in conventional medical schools, nutrition training is maybe, anywhere between 1 to 3 credits. It's not all that much. Whereas we're getting up to 16 credits of nutrition. So we really kind of understand how what we are putting in our body affects our body and the way the body runs. If we think of food as fuel, the quality of the fuel that you put in is going to change the output of the energy that you have. So, and so that's kind of what naturopathic medicine is. This subspecialty of naturopathic oncology that I do, first off, takes additional training. So I had to do a residency and a fellowship in naturopathic oncology, spent time rotating in hospitals, spending time with surgical oncologists, radiation oncologists, medical oncologists, you name it, and really tried to learn how we can help support our cancer patients. Again, like when a person is diagnosed, and maybe Abhin, you experience it with your own family, but when a person's diagnosed, they want to have some sort of sense of control over their diagnosis. They want to say like, well, what can I eat? What can I do? What should I exercise? Should I not? Should I fast? And right now, medical oncologists are not trained to answer those questions. So that's where we come in. My entire training is to help answer all of those questions for patients, help them, guide them on nutritional recommendations or exercise recommendations, or whether they should be taking that supplement. And if they are taking the supplement or the herb, are they taking the right dose? And are they getting it from a good source? Or are they taking a really crappy, low quality supplement that has a fourth of the dose that you need in it? So that is a little bit about the education. The naturopathic wellness standpoint, from a naturopathic wellness standpoint, there are so many diseases in the US right now that are lifestyle and diet, kind of the etiology of them are lifestyle and diet in origin. A lot of cardiovascular issues, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, a lot of these things can change with diet and lifestyle interventions. And a lot of those diseases that I just mentioned, things like diabetes, are also risk factors for cancer. So if we can help our patients start to decrease their risk status or start to decrease or reverse their disease, then we are setting them up to be healthier in the future and not be at higher risk for other issues like cancer or depression or a chronic illness. So the wellness side of it is, hey, listen, you may not have a terminal diagnosis right now, but let's go ahead and figure out how we can help you reverse your chronic illness or reverse your diabetes or whatever it is. So, okay, the second part of that question was, challenges as an Indian doctor. Okay, I have to say in the US, for the most part, Indian doctors have like a pretty good rep. We like, most people will request Indian physicians because I think that they know, and I know this learning through my dad, that Indian medical training is like top notch. You are exposed to, because you are obviously in, different environment, you're in the tropics, you're still kind of, hygiene is not a given in India. You are dealing with a lot of very severe illnesses. You're dealing with still a lot of infectious agents or infectious diseases that we don't have in the US anymore, or if we do, it's at very low numbers. So the amount that you're exposed to in India as a physician going through training is incredible.
Yeah.
And you can, come to the US and diagnose based on physical exam and by good intake and asking the patient questions, right? Whereas in the US, and obviously, this is not a negative or a con of the US training, but we have a lot of advanced technology here, right? We have these great MRI machines. We have these liquid biopsies. We have all of this cool technology. But I think a lot of docs in their training become reliant on it, right? So while I was not trained in India, I definitely will appreciate the reputation that Indian doctors have set in the US. Because a lot of times people will often ask me like, oh, were you trained in India? Because that's, for them, having experienced their Indian doctors, they know that they're going to get a really good, high quality doctor. So I have not had challenges as an Indian. I would say as a female doctor, there are more challenges.
Yeah.
Right? Like people are like, wait, are you the nurse? Get the doctor in here. Or, that kind of thing. So I would say that majority of the challenges I've faced have been more gender focused rather than, where my ancestry. I always will get the question and this can sometimes toe the line of like, people will inquire and sometimes it will be nice. Sometimes it will be not, of like, oh, where are you from? Like, where's your last name from? Why is your, things like that. And, for the most part, if you stay respectful in the conversation, it doesn't have to be a con, but yeah, I definitely will get inquiries often about my name or my ancestry.
I feel like we opened up a very interesting can of worms right at the end for us to keep talking about, but
episode 2, part
we
2.
have to have you back on at some point. So yeah, this was actually a really, really great episode. Thank you so much for accepting the invite, and thank you for being on here. I think we had really great conversation. Personally, I learned a lot. Personally, just listening to your story was extremely inspirational. It's kind of, I'm trying to reinforcing that into my own life and seeing what I can do better. So I really appreciate it. I think the one question which I'm sure people in the audience might have is how do people reach out to you? Are you accepting new customers? And if so, how do people reach you? Is the website?
Yeah, so I am definitely seeing new patients. If you go to drmalani.com, my last name, and we can maybe link that below, you can find how to schedule with me. You can find how to contact me. I write a lot and do a lot of education and webinars for patients. So if you Google me, you'll probably find that I'm doing something in the next few weeks. But definitely my website is the place to start, drmalani.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. I think we reached the end of our episode. Once again, Sonia, thank you so much for coming on. And we're definitely having you on in the future. So just let's figure out our schedules and we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I truly want to say to both of you, I think the platform and the conversations that you are bringing are incredibly insightful and important. And I think that sometimes, regardless of what country you're coming from, the immigrant experience is not talked about enough, and it's not talked about to the people who are back home. And so the fact that you are creating this platform for people to share their stories is just, I think it's really going to change things and shake things up. So awesome job, guys.
Well, thank you. And to add to that, so if anyone of our listeners is listening to listening or watching this episode, please do feel free to reach out if you have a story to tell, because we're more than happy to have you on board and to talk to you and to get a better understanding of who you are, where you come from, and what you're doing. This whole idea was created to tell the stories of people like us, like yourself, and we we'd love to hear from you.